the school shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. That was the second deadliest school shooting ever in the US. And it came just 10 days after a mass shooting in Buffalo, which was motivated by white supremacist ideology that killed 10 shoppers in a grocery store. And just to zoom out, in the last decade, school shootings, we've seen them like greatly increase in both frequency and deadliness. So that's why we're having this conversation today. We want to hear from students across the country about like what are the impacts of those incidents and what are some of the possible remedies that we can think of together. So to begin, I wanted to bring us back to last week. So the Uvalde shooting happened on Tuesday, May 24th. It left 19 students dead at an elementary school. And the next day, on Wednesday, I'm curious, like for you yourself, like, so then many of you, I imagine, the very next day stepped into classrooms, stepped through the school doors. Like, were those events that happened in Texas in the back of your mind? What was going through your head as you stepped into school?
I guess like obviously school shooting is like very much like something that's like affects the very fabric of our society. Whether it's like an event that like even if you're like not currently in the state or don't really go to the school where the shooting happened, it's still like something that's like in the back of your head. For me, kind of like the questions that I have been thinking about is like how like do these shooters actually manage to remain inside the school, do such thing like that when like school should take all the precautions that they can so like the students are safe, because I feel like this shouldn't be something that we should be concerned about. We're going to school for like to get the educations that we need. Why is like our safety and then our life is like on the verge of like you never know what can happen.
I was 9 or 10 years old when Sandy Hook happened, and I don't think back then I was aware of the problem school shooting. And as you grow up and you hear about all these mass shooting events, both in schools and outside of schools, to hear of a Sandy Hook like school shooting in this year and age in this time, I mean it's horrifying. It's terrible because you thought you thought that school shootings would happen less as time went on. You'd think that would be a problem that would have been addressed. It's different to experience or to listen or hear about a school shooting when it's targeting such a vulnerable group as elementary school students. If we as a society want to ignore school shootings that affect uh, teenagers, then fine, that's fine. I guess that's horrible, but to ignore something that's affecting children who are not even at an age to understand what a school shooting is, what children who should never be exposed to that type of thing, like for that to be something that we as a society allow to happen. I know for a fact that if I ever have children, I don't want them to live in that type of world where they have to worry about going to school.
After hearing about this like school shooting, I started to consider to myself like am I safe enough in like at my school? And what I've noticed throughout my school, and I've noticed how I have security guards patrolling around the entire school, like the entire campus. And there's also some monitoring the entrance and exit gates, and how some like every visitor um going inside the school has to go to the office and have an identification sticker that says their name and their age and if they're a school staff or just a visitor. We also have security cameras throughout the school, and I've also noticed that not the classrooms don't have a first aid kit, and but they do have a fire extinguisher that could probably be used as a object to defend yourself if you can't like protect yourself in any way. And
And Devin, I mean, I just want to jump in and say that like it sounds like this event had you really thinking about how safe your campus is. And like a freshman in high school has to think about defending themselves with a fire extinguisher should an intruder come into your classroom, right? Like that hit me.
I felt very scared because, for example, I go to a small private school, and on top of that, an Islamic school. A couple of weeks before that event, there was also attacks on our mosques, in our communities. They've been multiple, for example, Islamophobic attacks this year alone, and thinking that someone could go into an elementary school and murder so many kids, and then they could hear about our school, and on top of that we're Muslim, on top of that a hate crime, and they could easily come in and do the same. I felt terrified, um, because that could have happened at any time. That could have happened that same day. That could have happened the next day when I went to school. So I was very terrified. I felt numb because I I thought that this is the way that I guess this is the way that we're living. I guess this is the way society is, and I don't want to say that it's as if I've given up, or I guess, but at that moment there was a sense of lost hope because I felt like these attacks, or of all kinds, or these shootings have just been continuously happening. And I felt that there was no way to stop it.
Just in follow up to that initial sharing about what was going through your head the next day at school, I'm also curious, how did your peers talk about it? Did teachers address the shooting in the days following? How did that come up in dialogue in classrooms?
I don't remember, there wasn't any formal address of it. I think you could hear peers in the hallways talking about it. I could hear my classmates kind of referring to the casualties or mentioning the incident in their talks, but there was no formal address by the administration or by our teachers. But later I would see that when I was picked up for school a couple days after, I came across my mom speaking to one of my teachers, and they were both expressing fear. It sparked something in me where I guess you could really tell that, okay, this is reality. And I guess that feeling of numbness, I guess, was shaken a little bit because, oh, well, we actually have a real problem here. The teachers are actually concerned, which means I should be concerned, which means that we need to do something because this can't be continually happening.
Josh says, I think the nervous, so he's talking about the feeling after the shooting for himself. I think the nervousness was always there because we've seen many of these situations. It's sad that this is a normal event and people at school say, quote, but what can we do? It doesn't feel safe going to school, but it's crazy that I don't feel incredibly scared, even though this can happen to me. I didn't feel that scared because they occur so often. I hope my school has better precautions, and this shouldn't happen to any child or their family. And then he said we had a drill the next day, although it was scheduled before the shooting, and not many people were talking about it. And one teacher mentioned it briefly, but that was it.
I watched a TikTok video and saw footage of a dad whose daughter was one of the victims of the Texas school shooting, and I saw how how sad he really was, and like he let out this type of cry that sounded like he was super exhausted and tired of what had happened and how devastated he was, and I felt really bad for him.
I guess like for me, it has been like just like kind of using like social media as an outlet to like advocate for issues like that. And I had like a few friends who like are like part of March for Our Lives and organizations like that who have been like sharing resources online. I guess like it made me think like how should like teachers and parents should even go about talking about like such topic like this. It's because like obviously it's just like puts a lot of like toll on like someone that's like initiating the conversation, talking with like my peers, how do we even like start this conversation? Like, how do you even go about, talking about this and then be able to be like a resource to someone? Because it's like something that isn't really talked about a lot. When it happens, like the next day, it's like when everyone is like talking about it. And then after that, it's just like, it's gone, like it doesn't exist. I think schools like really need to like prioritize if issues like this happen, like make it like a bigger message rather than just like, having like small classroom setting conversations or just like you talking with your peers. Because I feel like there's like a lot of like misperceptions around like mass shootings, and I feel like someone who is like an adult or like an administrators will like have like a bigger role into topics like this. I feel like they need to like go about addressing it and then making sure that the conversations exist, but also the necessary precautions to like take so it doesn't happen again.
And I think that's a really good point of like, maybe I'm going to bookmark this question of like, how can teachers and administrators best lead discussions around this with young folks? Diego, I want to give you a chance to respond to this question. Do you remember like what your peers were saying in the days after the Texas shooting last week, and like whether teachers addressed it in class at all?
When I got to school and we talked about it, it seems like there was a consensus of just how bad it was, and that I didn't hear a single joke about that day. And I'm happy I didn't, because it shows that it's actually recognized. We recognize the problem that it is, and we have absolutely no misconception or any wrong idea about just how bad it is. We all can come together and say, this should never happen again.
First question here is, I mean, just a number of you guys have talked about the policy aspect of this, and just from a very hard and fast perspective, like, in the US, 18-year-olds can't buy cigarettes, can't buy tobacco, alcohol, but in many states they can buy guns, including assault weapons, and the guns used in both Buffalo and the Uvalde shootings were legally purchased by 18-year-olds. So I'm just curious, like if any of you want to speak about your thoughts on like, is that right?
Like the government understands that like even if you're 18 years old, your body isn't fully developed, and if you're smoking a cigarette, that's gonna very like harm your body and like an early age before your body and organs are fully developed. But they don't see anything wrong with like purchasing a gun, which can take away more, which could like easily take away more lives than a cigarette if they were used in the wrong hands.
I believe personally that 18 to 25-year-olds should not have guns. That's because I think that group is the most vulnerable to those types of violent outbursts. If we're not going to address the mental health issues, if we're not going to address all the other underlying problems that cause people to not seek help, and that'll lead people to those types of violent outbursts, if we are not going to focus on fixing that, at the very least, there should be more gun control that's effective, not overbearing. I'm not saying that we should violate the Second Amendment, but I am saying that we should reconsider what our gun control and gun culture is here in America. What is the correct amount of gun control, and how can we avoid giving weapons to people who should instead be receiving help?
School shootings have increased in the last like 5 to 10 years. Why do we think that might be? Do we have any ideas? Like you mentioned, lack of mental health supports, for example, Diego. So, a couple questions out here. Feel free to respond to whichever.
I've seen mental health be ignored in my neighborhood or my community, and that might just be something that has to, it might be something that has to do with lots of other factors, not necessarily something unique to our community. But I see in my community and my local schools that when it comes to mental health support, there is very little to nothing. And it's always the bare minimum. It's, hotlines and whatnot. Hotlines are not going to help people. If we don't have people who actively engage with students, who are constantly asking them, who are always on the lookout for those indicators that something is wrong, unless we have that amount of actual support and we give resources to people to help alleviate our mental health crisis, I don't think we'll see any improvement.
It's like pretty obvious for someone to say, oh, they probably had like mental health issues. But I guess like it kind of like raises the questions like obviously a shooter would not be like planning an event like the day before. They, in my head, I'm like thinking that it's like they have been like extensively organizing the attack that they were gonna do. I went to a under-resourced high school, and then this high school that was like had usage of drug among my peers and also among the general population of the city. You can just like see like people walk around my age with their gun. It definitely like raises questions about like the policies that are in place, and then the way how like gun control, how feasible gun control is right now. Like what is like the underlying concerns that like making someone go out their way and then buy a gun and then do such thing like that. Part of it also should be like talking about issues like that in like classroom settings, and then validating those feelings that students are having, because obviously they need to be in a positions where students feel comfortable sharing their concerns about this topic. And then like if there's like someone that obviously mentions something that nobody had expected, like teachers like going out their way to like, give them the resources that they need.
So maybe this is the right time to bring back in that question you raised earlier about how educators can tackle these questions. I want to pause real quick and read what Josh put in the chat from a little while back. So I think he was commenting on whether the laws as they stand in certain states allowing 18-year-olds to purchase guns are right. He says, I don't think it's right. He got it for his 18th birthday and almost immediately shut up a school. I don't know a solution because people illegally buy things like cigarettes and alcohol. So raising the age limit may or may not help. There's bad gun control around the country. And there's also it's needed for self-defense. There are problems with every solution the government and people make. Guns have hurt many and helped many. Thank you for that, Josh. And now pivoting back to where we left off, Mabuba, if you want, I don't know if you want to say more about that. You mentioned that it might be really important to address this in classrooms. How can educators do that?
I guess like to begin to like initiate conversations, I guess like the first step would be just like having that conversations, whether it's like having an intimate conversations or having like a bigger classroom conversations about this topic, and then taking those concerns and then raising it to the administrators and then seeing the responses that they get. And then if the responses, because obviously with school administrators and then my experience working with school administrators, I feel like they're like interested in like hearing about student perspectives, but like they're not interested into like investing their time into like fixing it. I guess like part of the responsibility gets pushed to the students to like see how they could possibly fix the problem. But I feel like it shouldn't be like this, because the school administrators, they just have so much power over like ruling the schools, and it's obviously their responsibility to like gives like this sense of security when students come to their school. That's like my biggest concern. And then me like going to school every single day was almost like, I don't even know if I'm gonna see my parents, because it's just like something that's like always in the back of my head as I'm like going to classes. Like anything can literally happen on spot.
First off, like, are you, if I'm hearing correct, it sounds like you're saying teachers should address these issues, like they're important and should come up in classrooms. Second of all, it sounds like you're saying that in your personal high school experience, which was in Detroit, right? That these issues around safety and gun safety and students bringing guns into schools seemed linked to other larger systemic issues like poverty and academic supports. And it sounds like you're saying the systemic issues need systemic solutions. I'm curious if I could just get you to say like 30, 60 seconds more about like what are some of those systemic, like system level solutions that you think about?
When you're like in the streets, and then when you're like trying to like educate yourself, and then also be able to navigate your way around the streets life that you've been living, I guess like if there's like a student that's like, at least like from my school's perspective, it's just like they knew there were like a lot bigger population of students who are experiencing such things like this. And I guess like me like spending my 4 years in that high school, like I have always wondered like why is it still like this? That we know what the problem is, but like there isn't like someone that's like necessarily talking about it, or someone that's like in the district like taking any steps to like do something to like improve that. I guess I don't really have exactly like what steps they can possibly take, because obviously it varies from school to school. Thinking about my own high school, I guess like they really need to like hone into the conversations of where students are coming from, and then what is their life outside of school, because part of it, like people doing certain actions obviously is like influenced by where you are, the environment that you're in. And if the environment is like as chaotic as like living in Detroit and then going to school that's like everyone experiencing poverty and gun violence and everything happening all around you, like obviously even regardless of what you say, it will have like some sort of influence in you. I guess like topics like this should be very prominent, and then in all conversations that's like within the classroom but also within the school districts, that's what needs to be done.
So yeah, I don't know, Amira and Devin, we haven't heard from you guys in a minute. So if there's any, like, I'm curious if you have anything to add on any of these points that we've talked about recently, like, whether these topics should come up in the classroom, how teachers can do it, what kind of solutions schools can be looking toward. Like on some gun rights folks have said teachers should be armed in order to stop these sorts of incidents. A lot of experts have pushed back on that. Other folks are saying like schools need better counseling. Sounds like Mabuba's talking about like deeper systemic underlying issues there around like poverty and housing, connection to the school community. Yeah, curious whether either of you or anyone else has thoughts you want to share as well.
I think I do have a solution for this, and like I have this like it's like the same solution that I was working on for like my English project that I'm working on at my school for this TED Talk thing. And I think it's like some self-defense classes, like learning how to learning how to defend yourself against someone that's armed, or how to disarm someone. I think that would be helpful, and like self-defense is the only way you can resort to saving yourself and other lives.
Amira, did you want to chime in?
I'm part of the Muslim community, and we've went through a lot of either hate crimes or there's been a lot of shootings throughout the years. And I think as a community and as a school, we understand that most of the time, the reason why these shootings are initiated are because of biases towards Muslims or and discrimination. A lot of the time, the media loves to cover up that fact and loves to just blame it on, for example, mental health. And that's not to say that mental health should be undermined, but it's also a very easy way to just forget about the biases and the discrimination that are very profound in our communities. But on the other hand, yes, mental health is an extreme issue because of the fact that, especially in our communities, it's considered a taboo, and it's not really well resourced, and it's not encouraged. So I think in terms of my school, I think because we all understand about the biases and the discrimination. I think the next step is to kind of recognize how we feel emotionally and make way for mental health, because it's still a taboo in our community, and in our school, whether it's like, oh, you're not feeling well, you're fine. I don't know, it's not recognized a lot. So I think the next step is to kind of understand how all the students are feeling. Are they scared? Are they I'll bring up, are they numb again, or do they feel safe? And after, I think, let's say the teacher let's say the teacher is facilitating this discussion. After the teacher kind of gets a feel of how his or her students are feeling, kind of go the next step and say, what can we do to make you feel safe? I think having that one-to-one discussion from this teacher to student and to the administration, I think just opening up a way for the students to really evoke how we feel and what we want to see. I guess what Mabuba was saying earlier was that they love to ask for student perspectives, but they just put them aside. They never really read them, and they never really take them into consideration. They just want to have them as a label, as a way to show off that, yeah, we're listening to our students when really we're not. So I think when they finally take in how the students are feeling and take in their suggestions, I think that's when we're able to figure out safety measures.
I think one point you touched on that I think is really fascinating and a deeper question too is, like, you mentioned how a lot of hate crimes can come from racism or biases, and like there's this other question that we won't get into tonight of like that the country is grappling with, of like, how should schools teach about race, racism, gender? Is it schools' purpose to fight racism? Mabuba mentioned March for Our Lives. I know they have the youth organizers with that group have a protest planned for June 11th in DC around gun safety and gun safety laws. I'm curious for what's your all perspective on, is this a really key issue for Gen Z folks? Where does this issue fall? And is this issue a really key one for folks of your age? That's like one piece. And then also I want to leave it open if you have any last words to share on this topic.
For us to not do anything about this problem is to just hand it on to the next generation. I think it's such an important issue to us, to this generation particularly, because this generation, Gen Z, has really experienced it. We've really experienced those types of fears. We've been a generation that has been a target of school shootings, and not only is it something that's relevant to our generation, but it's also something that's relevant to the next generation. If this problem doesn't get solved, it's just going to carry over to the next group of students. And I think it's such an important issue, and we're seeing such a strong movement of students standing up for real systematic change, in hopes of bringing about change. Because if it's not us, then it's going to be the next people, and if it's not them, it's going to keep on going until, well, it no longer becomes a problem, and it just becomes an acceptable part of life.
It's also gun violence and mass shooting obviously is definitely a top source of stress, not just in our generation, but also across all generations. Obviously, Gen Zs are more informed and aware of the experiences that they have went through, and also the experiences of what have been happening in the past. But I feel it shouldn't just be the responsibility for us to raise those concerns, because it's, I guess, also with the protests that's been organizing, it's the movement to make a change exist, but that movement needs to come from something that is from a bigger platform, as in terms of other generations also taking that same, not the same step, but also being responsible for the stuff that's happening, because isn't just like necessarily a problem that like only Gen Z is facing. It's like across all generations. And I think part of it we kind of like forget, even like with protests that's like mostly organized by like young activists. And I feel like the young activists, the voices that they're trying to like raise, the concerns that they're trying to raise, I feel like it needs to be reciprocated from like people who are like have like so much power to like make a change to like those concerns that those are addressing. So I think it's just like something that shouldn't necessarily have like so much emphasis. Well, it should have like emphasis on like Gen Z's like bringing the concerns, but also it should have emphasis on like other generations to also, tag along and then help support the movements.
I think that yes, this is an issue for Gen Z. And with any issue, I always just remind myself, if not us, then who? There are people in power, but those people need to be reminded they're not doing their job. And I think it's sad, but the responsibility does land on us to speak up, to keep protesting, to advocate in order to remind them to push for policy, to push for actual laws that will actually impact and create change.
It's a heavy topic, but it's really been a pleasure chatting with each of you all and hearing your perspectives on it. So thanks for sharing, and thanks for taking the time to join in. I know the end of the school year can be hectic.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Take care,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Thanks.